If you've been watching the channel for a few months, you may know I made a video going over the security logbook before, as sometime last year I had a bit of an issue, that being this book was paradoxal. There was nowhere to put it on the timeline smoothly. While some of my friends like Hyberdroid believe it takes place in 2023, which I had as well for a long time, I had heard just a stupid enough idea it might work, that being MetaLogbook. And despite this being the most likely answer, I still thought it was dumb. After all, you're telling me that the first confirmed novel in the Five Nights at Freddy's games timeline was a one-off ARG not intended to be an in-world book? That's lame as shit. But it was an answer I accepted, given it just doesn't make sense fitting in timeline. But of course, I'm not here just to repeat myself like I did last time. No. Rather, I think I finally know when this logbook actually takes place. And honestly, it's kinda on me for being dumb and not recognizing it in the first place. And surprisingly, I think Hyper will still like this theory given it doesn't interfere with who the Fright Guard is, and actually gives a little bit more merit to the idea. But first, let's kill an idea right away. The security logbook was not written by the Fazbear Frights team. This idea really comes from the fact that inside the book, if you pay attention to the designs in the background, you might find that the office we see is quite familiar. It's the office from Frights. And it's more likely this office is based on Frights rather than the other way around, right? After all, people don't tend to look inside books and base infrastructure off of it. Well, the answer to this was actually told to us in the newest game in the series, that being Into the Pit, in which during Night 5 we make our way through Freddy's, or technically Jeff's Pizza. We have to enter the security office before accessing the ball pit, and you may notice it has a box to the left, a trash can, and a desk, with an empty wall from where the monitors were in the 1985 location. In fact, the only difference is that in 1985, it seems to be missing the box, which, like the posters, are shown in the drawing inside of the logbook. Little small details that I think the Frights team adapted to their design. After all, it's not like they had actual footage of what this office looked like in 1985 and likely based it off of whatever Jeff's place looked like with a mixture of what the book described it as looking like. And if this screams far-fetched, look at the storage room and tell me if it feels familiar to you. Did you notice it? In Five Nights at Freddy's 3, Cam 8, we see the same Balloon Boy drawing, same presence. This hallway is almost a one-to-one replica, and shown on security tape. Not to mention, in the story, what we found, Frights is described as having multiple locations from the FNAF 1 location that are objectively missing inside of the FNAF 3 gameplay, while not being an accurate depiction of the original FNAF 1 location, explaining why these two rooms aren't connected, but fairly replicate the rooms fairly well. But Shizu, what about the phone calls? I mean, only in Frights could the guard have heard both these messages, right? Well, that's a trick question, because if you remember in my MetaLogbook video, that neither of these phone calls are known about before the week the Fright Guard actually works there, with Phone Dude treating the cassettes found in the safe room to be something special, suggesting he hasn't found any of these before, and that these are the first tapes he's finding the week you're playing. So how would they make a book, including the tapes, if neither of them have been found yet? And at the same time, there was no time period in which both these messages showed up. But as of now, that's not actually true. In the week before, on the same pages that would lead the community down a goose chase for its correct year, it would mention that the phone calls he's listening to sound fairly familiar to the ones he records the week before Five Nights at Freddy's 1, but slightly different. If this is the case, during the original Freddy's, both the Night Guard tapes and Springlock tapes did exist. In fact, throughout the novel, it makes mention of climbing into Springlock suits, and refers to the Springlocks as a new feature for this location. Okay, but Shizu, what about the animatronics? The presence of Mangle sets this book back to 1987, if not later, right? Well, not really. Again, if you've been watching my videos for a few months, you would know that I actually predicted Mangle was an animatronic at the 1985 location a while ago. Given her sharing a stage with Foxy in the Five Nights at Freddy's 2 teaser, her showing up as in the drawings, which include the Springlock suit Fredbear and original characters from the FNAF 1 location, as well as her mask showing up inside of Fall Fest. Oh, and Nightmare Mangle, but I can already hear the bitching from here about how using supposedly non-canon characters is not allowed. UCN, but I digress. Other than Mangle, the characters used here include the classics, which, thanks to Retrofit, we know existed at the original Freddy's, the Puppet, who in order for Give Gifts Give Life minigame to, actually exist, as well as the night sequences in Five Nights at Freddy's 2, needs to have been in this location around 1985, and Balloon Boy, who still to this day doesn't have an actual solid time of release, except we know that he was the only animatronic that was canon to Five Nights at Freddy's 4, suggesting that he's existed since 83, and likely was at the 85 location as well. But the other set of animatronics mentioned here is what I'm interested in, that being the fun-time animatronics. After all, the only way the employees would have known about these characters is if they were still active animatronics being used at another location. And wouldn't you know it, around 1984 or 85 is when Circus Babies would open, and while open for only a short period of time, if this book was being made during its opening, it likely wouldn't be seen as weird as having these characters inside the book. Looking at all the evidence on the table, it seems objectively likely that this book was written in 1985, and that's on the tip of the iceberg, given I didn't even mention how this book describes there being multiple Freddy's locations, or at least multiple establishments, how this book was written by Fazbear Entertainment mentioned multiple times, which likely had no involvement with the Fazbear Frights team, given they were trying to lay low in 2023, or the fact that details like the maze leading the player to the safe room, something that only existed at Freddy's locations with Springlock suits, and the interactions with both Bite Victim and Cassidy all seem to suggest that this is the first time they're meeting, all suggest that this book is canonically written in 1985. And so, it's done, right? Well, no. There are actually 2 more time periods this book exists in. And this is the part where Hyperdroid might accept this theory. While the book was written in 1985, that is not when Mike writes in the book. The red pen distinctly refers to casual bongos and exotic butters, neither of which would be possible if Mike was writing this book back in 1985. Not to mention, Mike would have been 15 years old, which while 17 might be believable, 15 is not a realistic age for someone to be hired as a night guard, let alone as a technician before being a night guard. Not to mention, Circus Babies Entertainment and Rentals doesn't open up until after the closure of this Freddy's, once again creating a time paradox. If it weren't for the fact that the week before mentions that some parts of the Freddy's location was sealed off for years, and this would likely include the half of the building we see in Into the Pit, which given the office design inside the book would have been made for the guard in that desk. So it likely remained in that desk until the Frights team would end up finding it. As for what happens next is up for your interpretation. However, if you believe that Mike was the protagonist in Five Nights at Freddy's 3, this is how he gets his hands on the book and fills it out. Meanwhile, if you believe anything else, the book would end up in an auction at the end of Five Nights at Freddy's 3, and that's how Mike gets his hands on it. Either way, it takes place after Sister Location and before the events of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Simulator, giving us time period 2 for this book, which leaves us with one more time period, the sticky notes, which is actually the easiest, given it mentions that mentions of the safe room should be ignored, and the book's already been written in by Mike. It's likely after the FFPS fire. When Fazbear Entertainment went looking for pieces for its museum, they found the book and sold it as merchandise. And that's the perfect timeline of the security logbook. If it weren't for another thing, there's these 2 pictures. What the hell's going on here? Well, ladies and gentlemen, and those smart enough to do away with the whole notion, this is actually explainable thanks to the original plan for Into the Pit, as in the trailer we see Bonnie doing the floss, which you reasonably wouldn't be able to do in 1985, except we know the other side of the pit isn't real time travel, rather Agony shenanigans, and wouldn't you know it, the book that shifts letters and leaves numbers here and there likely is infected with Agony, especially given both Frights and FFPS were also locations filled with Agony. No different than how spirits altered the arcade games back in Five Nights at Freddy's 2 and have repeatedly been doing it in almost every single game since then. And like that, we never have to touch this damn book again. Dave is the name of the crying child, Cassidy is the name of the 5th missing children incident kid, and this book was resold by Fazbear Entertainment after Mike wrote in it between Sister Location and FFPS, potentially during FNAF 3, and the original book is from 1985. Let's hope we never have to touch this book again. Well, except for that thing, but that's gonna have to wait. Instead, I want to tease you with a little idea in this book that got overlooked. Would you rather give a hug to Freddy or to Foxy? Let me know what you think this might mean in the comments down below, and if you liked the video, let me know by liking the video, and make sure to subscribe to stay up to date when I release both the unnamed video and a video involving this closing question. Until I see you again, matane!